The music industry generalizes what music is. It's two rights, it's live, it's advertising and sponsorship and branding income. So in terms of the recorded music industry, and that's critical because it's recorded music which does investment. It's recorded music which takes a band from Mannheim's Pop Academy, throws 400,000 euros at them and tries to get them to go and headline a stage in Berlin or some big city. So in terms of that side, in the UK, we're seeing some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing heartening results, especially during a credit crunch, what's happening with those revenues. It's worth picking up that DVD sales were down, computer game sales were down, but recorded music was pretty much flat. So with that, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, but that's UK and that's the recorded music industry. Other countries, other parts of the music industry don't necessarily reflect that trend. And I talked briefly about America, where you're seeing declines in recorded music continue at pace. Japan has had a pretty worrying year and digital revenues look to be falling there now. And the worrying one for me is Spain. In terms of the situation in Spain is an example of an industry that really has, hit some really tricky problems ahead in terms of how it's going to unfold. Yeah, so last year we put out a report which I referred to in our presentation here in Germany called Adding Up the Music Industry, and in that report we looked at all the different forms of revenue for the music industry, and we looked at advertising and sponsorship. We worked with a company called Frucht, a very interesting company, to try and get an estimate of what is this advertising and sponsorship industry made up of, how much is it worth, and is it up or down on the year before. The answer they came up with was around about £89 million in the UK, and a combination of 6 areas: live sponsorship, the O2 Arena, more classic area, take that as an example, but also event creation, where Orange, a mobile telephone company, would create its own event from scratch and build that event up, so they monetize everything that went on inside that event. And it was, broadly speaking, flat on the year before. So we now have an understanding of what the industry is made up of and how much it's worth. The only other thing I want to add to that, though, is it's worth remembering who gets that money. Who gets that money is not the bands starting off in Pop Academy. Who gets that money is established heritage bands, Beyonce, Bon Jovi, who's doing 15 nights in the O2 as of June, and yes, I have a ticket, unfortunately. But that's who's getting the money. It's not the bands down in the tail, it's the bands up in the head. Very few of them, because you can't get advertising, sponsorship and branding revenues if you haven't got a fan base to which that advertiser can reach an audience with. So it's still that catch-22 of who's going to invest in the unknown talent. Sure, there's money in advertising and sponsorship, but it's for bands who are established. It's not for those baby bands who are just trying to get started and pay rent next month. Yeah, I mean, maybe a better example might be Apple and using Feist in a commercial, and that makes a market for people who can do folky, dancey music, because you might get a phone call from Apple saying we want to sync your song. So that's good exposure, but that's the sync business, right? That's the sync business, and that's always been there. I've worked on some sync deals in the past myself, with Diodato's 2001 for Coca-Cola, so we understand how that works. I mean, a couple of points in the sync business: if everybody believes the money is in syncs, everybody goes in shopping music for syncs. And if everybody does that, the price that you can get for a sync deal will fall, because everybody's competing to get that deal. It might even go negative. You might pay Levi's to use your song because you're going to get so many sales elsewhere. So just the first observation is, if you think that's where the future is, and we all go there, it ain't there, because we've all ended up crowding out the market. The other thing on syncs is just to keep in mind the two rights at work, the artist right and the songwriter right, and the way they work in a sync deal is kind of interesting too, and it just highlights a point that Ellis Rich has said to me for years and years. He's our chairman at the PRS in Music and a real mentor to me for many years now, which he always makes this point, which is, without the song there is nothing. So if the market isn't syncs, who owns a song has a strong upper hand, and that you can't do nothing without that song. We can re-record that song, we can get a covers band to do a version of that song, but without the song there is nothing. That for me, that really powers home the message about the value of songwriting and the songwriter itself. Our market came up with 3.6 billion, was the size of the total pie. So you can imagine that as we talk pie charts. About a third was recorded music. A good bit over a third, about 40% was live music. Live was worth more than recorded for the first time in modern history. And a very small segment of that 3.6 billion was the 89 million of advertising sponsorship. So again, it's a sizable sum of money. It's an important segment of the overall industry, but I re-stress that point. It's money that goes to the head. It doesn't go down into the tail, and it doesn't go down into investing in the tail, which still creates that problem of who's going to invest in the heritage bands of tomorrow, who are going to carry on selling out those stadiums which are selling out today. That's the question that Pop Academy really has to discuss. You're seeing examples of that. You're seeing like Bacardi do deals with Groove Armada, which is interesting. I'm not seeing too many of those deals get repeated, which suggests that perhaps there's still some work to be done in that area for it to take off, if it is to take off. I mean, these are all, hypothetical, future-gazing questions that we're doing here. But yeah, there's nothing stopping it. I just think that I mentioned on stage, it's not the new schools of thought that really interest me. It's when the old rules of the game kick back in, and the old rules of the game. If you speak to Chris Blackwell from Island Records, he got lucky with Bob Marley and he got lucky with U2, and he didn't get lucky with a whole bunch of other artists. And it's just that portfolio and the hope that one of those bands is going to write Pride in the Name of Love, and that will pay for all the losses elsewhere. That's the old rules of the game, and I don't necessarily see us moving that far away from those old rules of the game, despite what all the blogs and the armchair critics would say.